Hello, I am your host, Tracy Otsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for another episode of ADHD for Smartass Women. You know that my purpose is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. In the thousands of ADHD women that I've had the privilege of meeting, I've never met not one, that wasn't truly brilliant at something. So, of course, I am just delighted to introduce you to Devene Godau. Devene Godau is a certified professional dog trainer with more than 25 years of experience working with everyone from family pets to professional scent detection dogs. She's also the creator of The Distracted Dog Lover, a community for neurodivergent dog owners who want compassionate, real world training advice that actually works. As a trainer with ADHD herself, Devene blends humor, empathy, and science based strategies to help people and their dogs connect with more ease and a lot more joy. I first met Devene when she asked me to share some neurodivergent friendly tips for training your dog. And I was instantly struck by how aligned her approach is with everything that I teach: self awareness, compassion, and designing systems that fit the brain that you actually have. So, welcome, Devene. Did I get all of that right?
You did. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I am delighted to have you. So, what we always do in our podcast is we talk about our diagnoses first, because I think what happens is it helps you connect with our listeners. You know how it is when you feel like, oh, I have something in common with this person. We actually listen more intently. So, can you share your diagnoses?
Sure, I have struggled my whole life with paying attention, but as a child, I was very quiet and I got all my work done, so nobody ever suspected anything. And when my children, I have three children, when they started to struggle with several mental health issues, being neurodivergent, we decided to get them tested. And I was sitting in the psychiatrist's room with my child, and he kept asking them questions like, do you drift off when you're trying to pay attention? Do you have trouble finishing tasks? And I was like, yes, yes. And he looks at me and says, are you answering for your child or for yourself? And I said, both, right? And going through the whole list of questions, I think I was more aligned than my child with the diagnoses. And he looked at me and said, I don't want to diagnose you myself. I work with children. But he sent me to a colleague who very quickly said, how have you been doing this your whole life? But it was just the way it was in the 70s and 80s. No one suspected girls of having ADHD. So since then, I tried medications and just having that understanding, knowing that there was nothing wrong with me per se, right? That my brain just worked differently. I immediately had more compassion for myself, and it made life so much easier, right? There's still struggles for sure, but now instead of frustration, I know to look for solutions.
Yeah, that understanding, it changes everything, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. And I think what I found now as a dog trainer, right, working with the public, I want everybody, I want all of my colleagues to know, right? When someone's running late, it's not because they don't care, right? So we'll get into all that, I'm sure, but it has made me look at everything differently.
So, how long ago was that when you were diagnosed?
That was probably about 6 years. And once I started the medication, I remember saying to my psychiatrist, if only I had taken this in college, right? I was on academic probation for so long because my success in high school was due to my parents standing over my shoulder, like, do this, do this, do this, do this, right? And it worked. It probably exasperated my anxiety, but it did work, right?
It got you into college.
It sure did. And that was the expectation. I was going to go to college. And when I went there and I realized I don't have to go to class, no one's checking on that, no one's taking attendance. It was a whole new world. And I learned very quickly that's not the answer, right? That's not going to keep me successful either. But I remember saying to my psychiatrist, if I'd had these plans, if I'd had the meds, I could have done more. I would have kept going to school. I wanted to go into zoology. I have a journalism degree. Mainly, I do like to write, as people read my blog will see, but mainly because journalism didn't require math and I could not focus on math. So I remember saying, I am so angry that it took this long. And she told me to snap out of it. She's like, we can't go back in time. In the early 90s, nobody was really looking at a lot of women, especially with good grades, being neurodivergent. And we just would not have known how to deal with it at that point.
So, how did you get through school? And I'm talking college now.
College was tough. I took basic math because I decided I'm going to take math in case I don't want to get stuck with journalism. I had to take the basic math class 3 times, 3 times to pass it. And so the first year I was on academic probation, probably the first 2 years. And then when I went into my program, and I was a student journalist in high school, I had a lot of skills in that department and a lot of interest. So once I got into my program, I was so micro-focused, and I would, work on my homework then 12 hours a day. So I thought, well, I found the solution. I've grown out of it, right? Grown out of my attention issues, when really it was just I was doing something I like to do.
The problem was the math, getting past the math. Were you diagnosed with something like dyscalculia? But I'm curious if that really was what the problem was.
No, although that is interesting because the testing I went through was, I think, fairly quick. I think they knew fairly quickly because my children were diagnosed and they said, oh, it's hereditary, right? So no, my diagnosis really was ADHD with some anxiety and depression, right? But that was all manageable. And even the depression, I think, was exacerbated by the ADHD because the meds I took for depression really didn't do a lot for me. It was, they put me on Adderall, and that was what really made life brighter, right?
Is that still true today? So you're one of the lucky ones where it really works.
It is. In fact, I was very concerned. I still kind of am to some extent about being addicted to it. You hear so many stories. So I take it very, very rarely, like maybe once or twice a week. I try not to take it daily because I don't want to become dependent on it. But I think I know if I have a day that I know is going to be tough to get through, I have a plan. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. So I want to know, Devene, what you were like as a child.
I was so quiet and shy, right, all through elementary school. We talked about my name, right? Nobody could say my name right, and I had a hard time correcting, especially adults, right? I just was so timid, and one of the reasons is I was so afraid to speak in school. I was afraid to get wrong answers. I was afraid to mispronounce things, right? So it was my turn to read during readers' theater. I would clam up and get super scared. And then once middle school hit, right? Once puberty hit, I just started talking and never stopped, right? I was always in honors classes, and I remember in 8th grade going into high school, asking my English teacher to sign off on my high school honors form, and she said, no. I'm like, why? She said, you talk too much. You need to be able to focus in those classes.
Oh my gosh. So what happened?
I ended up staying the regular track of English. It's funny now, my kids are like, they can opt in, right? My son just went into honors history, and I'm like, I don't think you're ready for that workload. And his counselor said no, but they're like, oh no, the kids can take what they want. And I'm like, oh, I'm kind of glad though. I would have put myself in all honors classes and probably been a mess. So I didn't fight it much at the time, but it didn't stop it was one of those sticky notes in the back of my head. I'm like, okay, well, talking too much, that's going to hold me back, so I'm going to stop. Well, we know that didn't happen, right? So we know that didn't happen, and now that I know more, I'm kind of glad it didn't, right? But it was just one more thing that I just thought, like, okay, I'm not doing that right, too. So I was trying very hard to be quiet. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. Anyone from high school will tell you I still talked all through school.
Were you the kind of student, though, were you annoying? Were you constantly getting in trouble? Or were you a good girl, but you just happened to talk?
I was the good girl that happened to talk. Teachers would tell me all the time, Miss Darovich, that's my maiden name, Miss Darovich, stop talking. And I would instantly get super embarrassed. I hated having attention called to myself at all. But then I'd sit there and think, I'd have to concentrate. Okay, don't talk. And then something would pop into my head. And if I was sitting like in chemistry with a lab partner, inevitably I'd lean over and tell them a joke or tell them my latest thought because I was so afraid it would leave my head. Right. So it was tough. Inevitably my parents were told, she talks too much. And, And I couldn't disagree. That was absolutely true. So,
So you got the comments on your report card that you disrupted the class.
yes, yes. And I see those with my children now sometimes too. So
What happened after you graduated from college?
after college, and it's interesting because I had worked all through college at a kennel. I knew I loved dogs. I always begged for a new dog, a new puppy for Christmas, and my parents just they didn't want the work, right? And so we had one dog growing up, and then my mom sent me to go work at a kennel, thinking if you can deal with 40 barking dogs, that should kill this drive, right? Which would make sense, but it didn't. I wanted to take every dog home, so
Oh gosh, it got even worse.
it did. And everybody said, "Why aren't you going to be a vet? Why aren't you going to be a vet?" Because I went to Michigan State, which is a huge vet school, and I was afraid of the science and the math, right? And I had a lot of success in journalism in high school. I was one of the top 12 journalists in the state during my high school years. So I said, "Oh, I'm going to stick with that," right? I was really, and the bottom line was, I had talked about becoming a dog trainer. I talked to my boss at the kennel about becoming a dog trainer, but the expectation from my family was that I needed to go to college, right? And I didn't know. Now there's so many more options for dog trainers to go into animal behavior as a science, and there are so many great options that if I were in my 20s now, there are so many programs I could take. So I said, well, I'm just going to go into journalism then, and so I went through journalism, and my other passion at that time was music. So in my mind, I said, I'm going to go into journalism, and then I'm going to go work for Rolling Stone, and that's what I'm going to do for a living. And I remember in journalism school them telling us, our professors saying, the media is dying, newspapers and magazines, they're dying, because that was the beginning of the internet. And they said, no, not every city is going to need a daily anymore. We're all going to get our news in one source. And I looked at them and said, it's never going to happen. There's people like my dad who reads up 2 or 3 papers every single day, right? But that doesn't make my dad is 95 now, so we know that those people are going away, and exactly what happened, right? So there weren't a lot of newspaper jobs. I never did get ambitious enough to go out to New York. In fact, one of my ADHD stories where I had a pure panic was I was working for a little newsletter and a little like music newsletter in college, and they said, "Hey, you really like 90s rap. What if we can get you Snoop Dogg's newest CD, and maybe we can hook up an interview?" And I was like, "Absolutely!" It sounded great at the time, but every time I had to call his people to try and set it up, I froze. I just panicked, right? And I never made it happen. And my kids today say, it's the only thing I'm disappointed in, Mom, is that you could have met Snoop Dogg and you didn't make it happen. And I said, yeah, that's fair, because I am also very disappointed, right? I absolutely froze, right? And so I knew things probably weren't going to progress. That shame kind of sat with me for a long time. And I think that's one of the reasons I didn't pursue news as much as taking my degree afterwards and going into marketing. I went into marketing for probably about 5 years, right? Because it just seemed easier and more straightforward. And I will say, my ADHD helped then too, because if I found a product or a company that I liked, it was very easy to write press releases and hype them up. I still love to do that. That's what I do for the community theater as well, so.
You've mentioned theater a couple times, and that kind of, when you juxtapose it against this kind of fear and being shy around calling Snoop Dogg and Snoop Dogg's people, it doesn't really fit.
No, well, that was one of those things. My kids got me into theater. My daughter is an actress. She's an adult now, but when she was 5, we actually used theater. I put her into theater classes to help with a speech impediment, and it really did help. And she stuck. She loved it. She's stuck. She's still doing it. And one day I was in the theater, and local to us, we have this theater that does huge productions, 200 to 300 people, open casting, right? They just want people to experience it. And I was sitting in the theater, and the director comes up to me and says, "You are here for every rehearsal, like for the last 2 years. Why aren't you on stage?" And it is something I always wanted to do. But again, I was scared. But I will tell you, because there were 200 people on stage, I said, this is the perfect time to try it. I can hide behind all of these other people. And I got on stage and I never got off. And now I'm on the board of a local theater, right? So, and I just love the creativity of it. It gives me a fantastic creative outlet. I hate studying lines. It's funny because, you would think that's the main thing, but I love showing emotion. So I'm a great background. I add layers to productions, and now I'm mostly backstage. I do a lot of the marketing. I'm producing a radio show or a radio play that we're doing right now, and I love, again, promoting unknown playwrights and promoting unknown works. So it's evolved into something bigger.
So I'm curious. I would love to do that kind of thing, but I have really poor working memory. And I tell the story often that when I was being melodramatic as a teenager, my father looked at me and said, "You should be on a soap opera." And I remember thinking, I would love to be on a soap opera, but I could never. I mean, those lines every single day, there's no way. And so I'm curious if your working memory is actually quite good, and so you don't struggle with lines.
I do struggle with lines after I say one line, all I'm doing is listening for my next cue. Don't miss the cue. Don't miss the cue. Don't miss the cue. Right. And then I one time paraphrased a line and the band missed a whole cue to come in, and that is embedded in my mind. So it is not, I think it's one of the reasons I like playing background characters. You're never going to see me going for the lead. And I like being behind the scenes. I've really taken to stage managing because then I can feel like all of the actors are my kids, right? And I get to take care of them and help them and make them feel better if they forget a line. But it's interesting because my daughter, who is also neurodivergent, she can read a script and memorize it in one or two reads. And I remember telling her, because school was a struggle for her too, like, if I could find a script with all of the microbiology terms you need to know next week, you'd ace it, right? It just, when she relates to a character, she commits. And I've always thought, like, why couldn't that be me? But I think I have other skills. I get to emote, which is what I really like to do on stage. And I've always been told, like, well, your facials backstage or behind the scenes are fantastic. So I like to just react probably more than I like to recite.
Okay, so like me, you struggle a little bit with the working memory. And I think if I'm even a little anxious, like thinking, "Oh my gosh, I need," because I can paraphrase. I know kind of what I'm supposed to say, and it probably would be funnier. But if I know I can't do that because then I never even thought about it, the person who's supposed to come in after you then misses their lines. I think that would make me more anxious, and then I would totally forget what I'm supposed to say, or I'd have it written on my hand or something.
Uh-huh. No, that was horrifying when the band didn't come in and the music director was a friend and he said, "I've got you." But I'm like, I'm so thankful, but the next production I have to get those lines when I don't know their cues. And so then you start drilling it, but that doesn't work when you're nervous, right? It just goes right out of the head.
Absolutely not. That just makes it, yeah, a lot worse. Okay, so the only thing I didn't ask you about your childhood and growing up, and then we'll talk about why you're here, is how were you socially? Did you have a best friend, good friends?
I did have I always had at least one best friend. And then in high school, I was in marching band and newspapers. So those people become like family, and people that go through trauma together tend to bond. So I've always had, in fact, the best friend I have now, I met my first day of freshman year. So, right. And she is incredibly neurotypical. So she probably looks a lot at what I do, like, what is wrong with you? She doesn't say that to my face, but I sometimes have to explain my thought process to her, So we've stayed together for, this whole time. Mostly our love of music and the arts, right, bond us together. But there is a joke that because I talk to everybody, and my thing in high school was always, everybody was always my best friend. So people say, "Oh, so and so." I'm like, "Oh, they're one of my best friends." Everybody. And I see my daughter do that sometimes now, and I'm like, "Why are you saying that?" And my best friend says, "That's you." I'm like, okay, that was what you were like at that age. I'm like, okay, get it.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so let's start with the obvious first question. How in the world did a journalism major end up training scent detection dogs? And maybe you need to explain to me what scent detection dogs are. Are they the dogs that go around looking for drugs at the airport? Because they freak me the hell out. Not because drugs, but I'm always afraid I'm gonna see someone like some young kid, who's gonna get.
Right, right. So scent detection works. So they are the dogs that we would train what they call green dogs. So I had them from about 8 weeks of age, actually birth in some cases because I have a breeding dog from our program at home, until about 10 to 12 months when they would go to our master trainer. And so our goal was to socialize and get them doing some basic sniffing. So then a green dog is a dog that has the potential to sniff, and all dogs do, but some dogs are much better at it than others. And he had the authority then at that point to train them on whatever our clients were asking for. So we worked with TSA. So those dogs were all going to be put on explosives, but they wanted to do that training themselves. So they would come and test our green dogs and they would hunt for toys, right? And then they would imprint the scents that they wanted back at their facility. So we could do, my master trainer was certified in many disciplines. We mostly work with explosives. But we could also do narcotics, live finds, cadavers, things like that. Yes, yes. And luckily I was never involved at that part. I have several friends that have been, and it's fascinating.
How do you know? I mean, obviously, I think most dogs have this incredible ability to smell, right? Much more than human beings do. But how do you know is it from puppy?
It's their olfactory system, a sense of smell, but it is their olfactory system, and they have such a high capacity. So every dog can smell, but a lot of dogs, they don't use it if they don't have to, right? So we would see some dogs, I would get notes. When I first came into the job, I got notes on some dogs that, like, this dog searches with their eyes, right? So we wanted a dog, nose to the ground or nose up in the air, catch that scent and try to isolate it, right? Try to find source. So if they were relying too much on their eyes, we would have to go back and try to get them to sniff, right? And so that's what I do. I do it with pet dogs all the time too, because sniffing is magical, right? So one of the reasons I loved working with scent detection dogs is people, when I went from the pet dog world to the working dog world, would say, oh, we shouldn't be making dogs work. I'm like, we're not making these dogs do anything. They love it because when they're scenting and they're inhaling more, it is, I equate it to meditative breathing, right? Breath work in humans, so they love it. And I have two dogs at home that they would probably sniff all day long until they passed out from exhaustion because it is tiring too, but they love it. So when you see a dog that goes into the training area and just their whole body language will change when you tell them to go find something, and they will just start scanning the environment. It is amazing. I could watch it all day long. And that was probably one of my favorite things I've ever done in my life is watching those dogs have so much fun locating things.
How do you train them though? Okay, let's take explosives. So how do you train them to, number one, even know what they're looking for? Like and are there certain breeds that are much better at this than other, like hunting dogs?
We do our lines mostly were hunting dogs. So the dog that I have at home, she's my personal dog now. She was a titled hunting dog. We bought her to breed because we thought her dogs are going to be great at that. But we also looked at her tenacity. She's a dog that would work all day long. The man who owned her before we did was like, she will work until she passes out, and that is still who she is, right? So we wanted that tenacity. And then we just get them from a very young age. We would start them at 8 weeks old playing nose games, like with treats, in tubes, and having them search for their meals. And so we wanted it to be a game. We wanted them to love it. And if they don't love it, I don't think that they can work for it, right? And then the other thing in the working dog world is they want dogs that will work for toys because it's just easier on the job site. So most places, there are some places that will have the dog work for treats because when they find their hide, then they get to play, right? And so we always took a look at the dogs like, okay, what are they motivated by? Are they motivated by toys or are they motivated by treats? And that would depend on where they would go to. And then the thing with explosives is there's a lot of different ingredients that can go into when we're talking homemade bombs, right? So I believe there's five. This was what my master trainer would do. Five main explosives that go into just about every bomb. So they would be taught on all of those when they found it to mark it. They would sit, right? That's their mark, which is different if you see a dog doing competition nose work. Right, where they're locating things like birch essential oil is one of the oils that we'll do in a sport called nose work. They don't want those dogs to sit. And it's funny, when I bring my nose work into the training sessions, they're like, well, they have an end, they have a they're sitting there, they have a final find, they have they're sitting for their find, and we don't want them doing that. But in the explosives world, we don't want them digging. So we have them turning around and sitting, right? So that is their marker, right? That's them telling us, or their indication. That's them saying, I found something, you need to look it up, and then you need to pay me, right? So that's when they get their treats or their toys. But they are so natural at it. Their brains can separate when they're smelling a scent. Their brains are already separating everything that's in there, right? So once they know a specific explosive, if it's layered in a homemade bomb with other things, they can still pick it out.
Because what they'll try to do is put all kinds of other scents in there so that it kind of takes people or dogs off the trail.
Yes. Yeah, they can do that, or just different, they'll put shrapnel in it, right, so it does more damage, right? So there's all sorts of different things they could put in it, but if they can find just a trace amount of some of those explosive ingredients, or some of those explosives, the dog's going to indicate on it, right, if they've been trained properly.
So can you tell then, from the time a dog is a puppy, like, I don't know, 8 weeks old and older, that, okay, that dog is going to be good at this?
I usually can. Sometimes I've been wrong. We had a dog that was testing. Actually, we had a dog that tested for TSA. That based on other feedback we had, he was testing just as well as some dogs that they had selected, and he went into that. And he was worried. Like he was worried, and he showed fear that we hadn't seen before, going on to things like shaky tables, and so obviously they need a dog that's confident enough to go into airports, to go into, if they're working in like around trains, that whole building vibrates. So all of these things come to play. So that's what ended up washing him out. And then we do have some dogs that just don't want to sniff as much, right? So, but that can also, it can also be their level of frustration will affect that, So I had a dog when I came in to that job. My very favorite dog, they said, he'll never work. He searches with his eyes. I think he was frustrated. So I'm a big enrichment person. So I spent some time with him and decided, I saw that he liked to swim a lot. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to commit to taking you swimming 20 minutes a week, at least once a week. And once he had that outlet, he was much better able to focus, right? So do you see how I'm kind of relating to these dogs?
Yeah, it's like an ADHD dog.
Exactly. I'm like, if you have that outlet, you can focus now. And that dog is now working on the East Coast, right? So he is, so it worked for him. But so sometimes you have to get creative. And then we have dogs that were trained to search low, because a lot of times trainers will start with low searches, and we can never get their nose up high. Well, if someone's wearing something in their backpack, we need their nose up high. So we very quickly started putting high hides up. So they started learning to scan both low and high, because dogs will tend to go to the last place they found something. So it was really important for us to switch it up.
So I'm thinking about what you're saying, and my first thought is, these kinds of dogs that are so brilliant at scent detection, they must be annoying to live with. They want to work, right? They don't just hang out.
Yes. So, no, it's true. In my own dog, when I was at home, she would throw a toy at me all the time, but she was making an association with me because she would come to work with me and we'd play all day, unless she was in her crate, because it was another dog's turn. And so once that company closed and she came to live with me, if I was at home and I didn't want to play with her, she had to be in her crate, and I felt terrible. And then I came to work. I got another dog training job, training pet dogs. And I come home one night, and my family's got her out. Her name is Jenny. And I said, how is Jenny out here laying down? They're like, she only does that for you. Well, she had made the association that I'm play, and so she would calm down for them. So that actually was a great lesson for me to take to my students as well, because that can happen. But I have had, because I used to raise puppies, right, for this program too. So I had a puppy that was such a great searcher. He would find that toy everywhere and bring it to me constantly. So I used to hide it when I didn't want to play. I decided to put it up in my cupboard because he couldn't reach it because he was about 4 months at the time. This dog is on my counter in my glass cabinet, and I'm like, oh, right, he's a scent detection dog. This is what he's supposed to do. And my husband wants to yell at him because he shouldn't be in our cabinet. I'm like, this is true, but we can't yell at him because this is what he has to do. So we ended up having to just baby gate the kitchen because he'd be on the table. He'd be doing all of these things that, you're right, in a household you can't have. But I'm like, we can't deter him from this. This is his job. Right? It really was. It really was. So luckily he got more into playing with our other dogs. That distracted him, and he used work as an outlet for all of that. But it was something. So when people would always say, I want a puppy raised for you, I'm like, are you sure? Because honestly, we can't, the things you're going to want to deter them from, we probably need in the field. So
That is fascinating. Okay, so my second thought was, aren't ADHD women amazing? Like, where would I ever have a conversation about scent detection dogs, And I wish that you were local. Where are you, by the way? Where do you live?
I'm in Metro Detroit, so I'm up in Michigan. That job was probably one of my favorites because I am not a 9 to 5 girl, right? I typically, when I was in the marketing world, it was a very hard schedule for me. But that job, because I would get up and I'm like, okay, we're going to go hiking. Now we're going to train. Now we're going to go swimming, right? It was amazing. And it really did fit my ADHD personality. It was always exciting.
And you are the perfect example that that's not just your career. This is who you are with every fiber of your being. And that means you know so much about, like, as I said, I wish you were here because I'd be like, please come over and help me train my dogs or tell me where to go. Because, I've tried and my dogs, they're not scent detection dogs. So they basically sleep all day. So it's really my doodle jumps too much. It's, annoying for me and then of course for guests, but I don't need these kinds of skills. So you had written to me about your greyhound with separation anxiety. And so I had a question for you, but I wanted you to first, educate all of us about your greyhound with separation anxiety, because this is how it all started, right?
It is. So she is the reason I'm a dog trainer. And I worked around dogs my whole life, and I married a man who had never had a dog. So I said, let's go to the dog show. Detroit Kennel Club has a big dog show every year. So I said, let's go to the dog show. I want you to meet all these different breeds. And I want you to pick whatever you want because I've had dogs, I've been around dogs. I want you to get what you want. And so we go to the show, and I had a coworker that was there with Greyhound Rescue with her 2 greyhounds. So I said, oh, I'm going to go talk to my coworker real quick, and then we'll go back to, to touring. And as I was talking to her, he started petting her dog, and I just thought, okay, there's a dog there, you pet it, right? And I didn't think anything about it, and I probably stayed there a long time because, I like to talk. Right? And then as we left and I'm looking at, I'm like, oh, look at, German short hair pointers, oh, Cairn Terriers, any size. He's like, can we go back and see the greyhounds again? And I'm like, really? That's what you want? And he's like, well, I don't know. Greyhounds are very, very calm. Most people don't understand that. So they literally, just because they're sprinters, they will have bursts of energy. They can run that 1/4 mile track. They're not running around all day long. They're not high energy. So he determined that's what I wanted. And quite honestly, I'm going to be honest, I was not attracted to the breed at all. I had done stories in journalism school because the plight of the greyhound is very well known, right? And I think the cause is very worthy, but I did not see it as a breed I was going to have. And so he was like, no, this is all I want. This is all I want. And I said, well,
They seem very aloof.
they can be, right? And most sight hounds in general really can be. So I decided, I'm like, well, a promise is a promise. I mean, it's not going to be my only dog, so let's go ahead and investigate. And I really did love the rescue people that we worked with too. They were right like my type of people. And we met this dog, and I don't even know how we ended up with her. She was very pretty, but she didn't interact with us at all. right? At all. And we decided we had to have her. And then every time we'd leave the house, and now with Greyhound Rescue, they always say you need to crate them when you leave, right? And they've never lived in a house before, so it makes sense.
So were these, so for, when you talk Greyhound Rescue, are these dogs that have been rescued from the track?
Yes, they are retired racers. Yes. And she was in rough shape too. She had no hair. I think they had her sleeping on burlap, and she had bones sticking out of her tail. She was, she was a mess. And so the fact that she changed my life, is kind of funny, because I would come home from work and it would be like a scene straight out of Carrie, because she's trying to get out of her crate and she was bleeding all over the place and she would eliminate all over the place. And then my next door neighbor told me that she barks all day long. And he was very kind about it. He said, she's a rescue. It's probably going to happen. But I knew, well, okay, there's something that has to change. This is not sustainable. And my husband, who had to have this dog, said, we got to fix her or get rid of her. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't get rid of anything. I remind him that's why he's still around, So yes. So I decided to find a place to train. Now with greyhounds, they told me very specifically, you can't put a choke chain on them. And that is the only way I'd ever trained before, right? I had only trained using positive punishment.
Is that because their necks are so tiny?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know that.
So so I was like, well, that's all I've ever done before. And so they said, well, try this place. And they gave me the name of a facility in Metro Detroit that didn't use choke chains. And I walked in there, and it took me 6 weeks to get this dog to sit.
Are they stubborn too? Or was it just this specific dog?
Greyhounds in general don't sit, because if they sit in the start box, they'll be slow out of the start box. So so it's just not a position they ever take. And then they don't have the muscles, right, for the sit. So it's a completely foreign topic for them. So I'm in this class full of golden retrievers and beagles that are doing beautifully. And here's my dog, like, I don't know what to do, right? I knew nothing, right? I'd worked around dogs, but I knew nothing about behavior. And at the end of class, the assistant instructor comes up to me and says, have you ever thought about maybe coming on as a volunteer trainer? And I said, were you that impressed by my dog? And she said, no, I was that impressed by your patience. So she said, we need someone that with that much patience, that doesn't give up on their dog. And I came on board as an apprentice, basically. I learned so much that by the time I took that dog to the next level of class, something in her turned on in week 3 of an advanced class, where I got accused of bringing a different dog to class. Like, she all of a sudden knew everything. But we were using operative conditioning, right? We use clickers in that class.
Explain what that is for people who don't know.
Yeah, so a clicker becomes a marker. So the marker marks the behavior that we want. So we're telling the dog, yes, that's what we want. So for instance, when a dog sits, I say the clickable moment is when the butt hits the ground, right? And so for dogs, because they don't speak the same language as us, it gives us a tool to communicate. Yes, that's exactly what I want. And it seems cumbersome at first, but once you see it connect with the dog, and I have had, especially with greyhounds, because I now run a class for only greyhounds, after we introduce the clicker, I will often have reports of that after that they play for the first time. I think it's just such a relief to have a tool for communication, right? And it is, so it really does put a magnifying glass on the fact that they don't understand what we're asking them to do, right? So,
and is that specific to greyhounds?
Oh, no, I think that's for all dogs. Most dogs come in with more confidence, right? But because the greyhounds, when they come from that racing world, they just don't know. They don't know that they're going into a home where they get to retire, right? They left the only life they ever...
It's like a feral child, right? I mean, an abused child who, yeah.
Everything's different. I'm like, we're taking them from Venus and throwing them on Mars. And so there's one thing now they know without a shadow of a doubt, right? And so I see them perk up so much with that, so, but I actually had a similar experience with my scent detection dog, because I believe she was trained initially on a shock collar. And so when she would throw behavior, she would do them, and she was very reliable, but she'd be very worried about it. And once I started adding that clicker, her whole behavior, her whole body language started to change. And she, so now the sit is so much cleaner. She would always do it, but she would look like, okay, this is it,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
This is
Please
it.
don't. Please don't.
And now
Yeah.
she's like, boom, sit, right? This is what you want. Where's my treat, right? So we do see it build a lot of confidence. It can be difficult though for people, I think, at first to understand, because I think especially when you're thinking I have to click, people always feel that their timing is off, but that's okay. We've got tricks for that. If they just stick with it, it is so worth it. It is so worth it for that dog to have that clear understanding.
I have many clickers. I think I read the instructions once. I tried it a couple times, couldn't figure it out, and I realized they are now in the drawer and I've not used them. Is that one of the best ways you think to train a dog is with a clicker?
I absolutely do. I absolutely do. Having done a little bit of every, right? I've used a choke chain. I've used, and now I've gone to the clicker. And sometimes we'll use what we call a verbal marker. If people really don't want to use a clicker, we'll say something like, yeah, like my verbal marker is yes. So my dogs do know both, because if I don't have my clicker, I still want to be able to tell them, yes, that's what I want. And I want it to be very clear and consistent. But dogs, they're incredibly keen discriminators. So when I'm using my verbal, if I say yes one time and yes another, that's two different types of feedback, right? And my dogs have figured it out, but it is difficult for dogs. It's not as clear as the clicker, which is always the same sound, right? It always sounds the same.
You are clicking as a message to them that I like what you're doing.
Yes, and it is always, we say it's the bridge between the behavior we want and the reward. So we don't have to have the treat out, right? And say, okay, sit for this treat. We ask for that sit, we click, we follow up with that treat, and that's going to increase the likelihood it will happen again.
Have you ever trained a Shih Tzu?
I have. I actually have. I also have a Chihuahua at home, and I mostly have a Chihuahua because people said I couldn't train one, and I like a challenge.
But aren't Shih Tzus the worst? This is like when we talk about ADHD, this always makes me laugh because the Shih Tzus, I have a Shih Tzu and I've got a doodle, which will do whatever you want to do, right? That's like dumb person's dog.
That's like my shepherd, yeah.
Yeah, but the Shih Tzu, she is so difficult. I mean, she basically looks at you, flips you off and keeps going. She does what she wants to do. Thankfully, she is somewhat food motivated,
Yes.
but I am thinking, because I was analogizing it to ADHD. So if you look on the list of intelligence for dogs, I think Shih Tzus are like literally at the bottom. The smartest dog I have ever had. My husband and I are, because we've had everything we've had several golden retrievers, we've had bulldogs. That's another one who basically flips you off. We've had a Doberman. We've raised a guide dog for the blind. So I really love dogs. And golden retrievers are supposed to be at the top of the list. Labradors are supposed to be at the top of the list. We've had them. That dog is twice as smart. And what my husband and I always say is that she literally understands words and she kind of speaks. Like you can talk to her and we're going to do this and this and this, and she'll just go right and walk to the door because she just knows what we're saying. But this is the deal. That dog's number one priority is getting what she wants for her. It is not getting what we want for her. And I think it's the same thing with ADHD, right? We are not obeyers.
Right.
And so the thought is because we don't do what we're supposed to do or what we're told to do, the idea is, well, that person isn't as smart because they don't do as well in school. Maybe their IQ tests, because there may be a learning challenge, their IQ tests don't really show their intelligence. To me, it's the same exact thing, someone with ADHD and a friggin' Shih Tzu.
Yes, yes. Because when people tell me my dog is stubborn, I'm like, you say stubborn, I say unmotivated. How do we motivate them? Which is exactly the conversations we're having in the ADHD world too, right? Like, how do we motivate? How do we remember? And I always remind people, you have everything your dog wants, right? And so how can we manipulate them and get that behavior without stressing them out, right? And making it fun for them, because that's the other thing. If training is fun, they're always going to want to do it. My two working dogs, like my Chihuahua and my Lab, still are actively training a lot. They never want a training session to end, and that's the perfect time to end it, because then they come out wanting more next time, right? And people always look at my Chihuahua like, oh, I thought they were untrainable. I'm like, no, just people make assumptions, right? And we can relate to that.
Yes. And whatever you believe, you will make sure that comes true, won't you?
Absolutely right.
So you have like the best behaved Chihuahua?
Well, It's funny. She has the freedom to make choices, and I mean I have the freedom to mark the behaviors that I want. So she is a really well versed Chihuahua. People are usually impressed by her when they see her. She's still a dog, and she still gets to make choices. But she's the only dog out of my pack right now that I've had since she was a puppy. So she was the only one raised being able to make choices, and I would I would mark those choices with a clicker and treat. So she's the easiest to train now because when we're in a training session, if I want to teach something new, she's not afraid to make choices because of that early training, right? So she will pick up something new so quickly. But she's still a Chihuahua. She still likes to, she likes to bark at the other dogs when they're playing. She's not as barky as most people assume. So when people say, oh, she doesn't bark, I'm like, oh, she does, just not as much as the Chihuahuas on TV, right? That's what they're known for.
Or my friggin' Shih Tzu.
She is the best in all of my dogs. So I have four dogs, and so my other three dogs are all large dogs. I have a greyhound, a German shepherd, and my lab. They all love to play with her, and she holds herself so well with them, and is just so confident with them.
She's the alpha.
I wouldn't necessarily say that because she knows when to back off, right? So, but they just have a great dynamic together.
So, is this a new greyhound?
This greyhound, yes, she's not the same greyhound that got me into training. This is a dog. So we've had now probably, I think he's probably our fifth, and we've fostered about 20. So we foster a lot. When they closed the tracks down in Florida, there was such an influx of dogs. The only way to truly save them was not even necessarily adoption. We wanted people adopting, but we needed to open up more foster spaces. So at that point, I was dedicated to fostering. So we probably had 6 or 7, and we had 3 dogs at that time. And I didn't want 4, but my husband was worried he'd never have another retired racer again. With Florida, ending racing, there's not many tracks left, and he really wanted another retired racer.
Why? Why? Just because it's so satisfying to see them come into themselves, or?
He has, I think the personality really matches him because they are so calm. They're very cuddly. They're very sweet.
Oh, wait, they are affectionate?
They are, yeah. I can tell you that first dog I didn't want, I became obsessed, right? Like all I wanted at one point, not long after we adopted her, we had 3 greyhounds, and we were fostering. So I really loved the personality. They can sleep all day, but they can go hiking too. So they were really, once we cracked the code and worked on Karma's behavior and got her over the what I thought was separation anxiety, it was really more of a confinement issue. She hated the crate.
How many years old are these dogs when you get them, the greyhounds, the retired racers?
They can race they're retired anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So she was retired at 3, I want to say, because she refused to leave the start box one time. So confinement issues were or refused to go into the start box. So I think confinement issues was a lifetime thing with her. So she was not there very long. And the one we have now is 5 when he was retired, or maybe 4. And then I had one that came to me at 18 months. I think she was a Spitfire. I don't know that she ever even raced. In fact, at 18 months legally, she could not have. It's against policy. I think she was someone's pet, and they just decided they couldn't keep her because she came to me sitting, which I've never had a greyhound do before. I showed the adoption specialist that came in. I'm like, look, I've already taught her to sit. And she's like, she came to us knowing that. I'm like, oh, I thought I was really that good. So they anywhere from that. And then sometimes you have the mamas, the brood mamas come up at like 8 years. And those are dogs that have had litters. They're all now, I don't know that there are many left because racing has become such a small thing now.
On Shark Tank the other night, this is about, the greyhound with separation anxiety, which we're not even sure it was separation anxiety at this point, right? But there was an entrepreneur who had this blow up doll called Gertie, your inflatable friend. So it was literally this blow up doll, and they put your face on it, and then you dress it in your own clothes, and then apparently you introduce it to your dogs, or your dog with separation anxiety, like it's a friend. Like you bring it in through the front door, you talk to it, you hug it, and literally the dogs, by the time, they'll accept Gertie, And you can leave, and the dogs, and the guy who designed it, it was specifically for the same situation you had, where he would leave and this dog would go nuts, and he was living in an apartment. But there were all kinds of like videos of these dogs sleeping on Gertie.
I think I've seen some TikToks of people dressing up like Halloween skeletons in their clothes. I can't imagine my dog not knowing that wasn't a human.
According to the guy and his research, they do know it's not human, but somehow it just calms them down because it's a substitute for you.
Yes. Uh-huh. I mean, I'd have to see that. To me, it's one of those things, and you see a lot of this in training where I like very science-backed facts, and if he has the facts, that's fantastic. But it's also one of those things that, well, let's try it. It can't hurt the dog, right? Let's give it a try. So
Yeah, exactly. If you're lucky enough that it works. Although then you have this weird blow up doll that you have to explain to your friends when they come over.
they're not going to believe it's for the dog, right? They just aren't.
Ebony, that you talk about dogs being a mirror for our emotional state. What do they pick up from us that we might not even notice?
They pick up anxiety a lot, right? So I know that my dogs, when I'm feeling anxious, they're going to start pacing more. And for my clients, what I see, and I see this in class a lot too, right? Because I see people get nervous in class, and that's one of the things I try most of all. I'll put breath work into class. Like, okay, we're going to throw some treats on the ground. Your dog's going to breathe so you can take a deep breath, right? And I'll do some like box breathing. And that helps so immensely because once they're loosening up and they're not tight on that leash, because a lot of times when we get nervous, we want to pull up on that leash because we think it gives us more control, and most of the time we don't even realize we're doing it. And they feel that, and when they feel that tension at the neck around their harness, they're going to be more tense, right? And they're more likely to bark, they're more likely to react to things. So I all of those things are things I like to address before we even start training the dog. I want to make that easier for both the owners and the dog, right? So it's one of the reasons I like to advocate for just having some fun, like walks in the woods. I'm big into, I want to get dogs more into something like forest bathing, right? Just time where you can just calm down together and see what that feels like. But they can really, like, that anxiety really does affect them, and once we start in training, what I see a lot is if the dog isn't doing the cue right away, they start to tense up. And in fact, I've been in this situation myself. They'll start to tense up and the dog is less likely to respond. I had a dog when he was going through adolescence. He was an amazing, amazing dog. He was a dog that everybody in puppy class wanted to take home. And then they hit an adolescence, much like in humans, where they just act like teenagers and like, sit, what. And I found myself getting really angry at him, and I knew that wasn't helping him or me. So I stepped back from obedience and I took a canine musical freestyle class, which is dancing with your dogs, right?
Wait, what?
It is, yes. It is. You teach a string of behaviors, mostly tricks, like a shake can turn into a high kick, and dogs will spin and walk backwards. And you string it to music. So if you look it up on YouTube, you're going to find some fantastic videos. That is a rabbit hole that is very fun to go down, let me tell you. And I took him to that class instead because I realized I wasn't as tense. If he didn't get a sit stay, I was stressed. I wanted to show him an obedience. If he didn't get a high kick, I didn't care. And what that taught me, because he started to pick things up like this, right? And so what that taught me is that when I was relaxed, he was much more open to connecting with me and learning and doing what I asked him to do. And he started picking up the high kicks and the spins, and there is no difference from a dog's perspective between there's no difference between tricks and obedience. So that was all me and my approach. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I can totally see the anxiety piece. I had my first dog, actually my first own dog that wasn't like a family dog, was a Doberman. And up until 18 months old, that dog was so confident and loved everybody. And then around 18 months, he started to get shy sharp. And this is a big dog. He was beautiful. His name was Einstein. I did not name him. The breeder did. But I remember being anxious, and my anxiety, because I was so afraid, because he was shy sharp. And you know how it is. If you have a Doberman and they bark, that's like a golden retriever biting. People just, And so I would be anxious and we would be feeding off of each other. And finally, I just said here to my husband, you're the one when we're in public, you deal with him because you're much calmer than I am. And like even with my Shih Tzu, she's very, like, she'll go after a Doberman. She's an idiot. She's so dominant. And I can tell that when I get anxious, she gets more feisty. Is that something that you think you can ever eliminate from a dog if they're just naturally more dominant?
Well, in the dominance paradigm is very interesting because it's not as cut and dry as we originally thought, right? So we used to talk a lot about dogs dominating the household. The original studies that were done were faulty, so we've kind of moved away from that. The study was basically done on wolves, on a wolf pack, right? And they talked about how the dominant wolves would correct other dogs, and that became the foundation for a lot of early dog training. And the original researcher that did that study went back and said that that was faulty for a couple of reasons. One, it was an artificial kind of circumstances. The wolves were confined to a smaller area than would ever happen, right? So there were limited resources, which made them have to pack up, right? And then we also know that in dominance, true dominance is control of the resources. And we know there are certain things like there was an old school behavior called an alpha roll, where to show that you were dominant, people would roll their dogs on their back. And what we found now is that if a dog is posturing, if a more dominant dog is posturing over a more submissive dog, they're not actually forcibly putting them into that role. The other dog submits. It just looks to the human eye, right? So that it's being forced, and it's not. So there's a lot of strange nuances in there that really happens. And in fact, in domestic dogs, it is fluid, right? You'll see dogs go back and forth. If we had true dominance, dog parks would be a bloodbath, right? They're not very fixed. And we know they do not dominate, or they do not rank with humans or interest or outside of their species, right? Too. So that is the other thing.
What about when you do have a dog who actually will challenge you? Like, I had a bulldog and I ended up in wound care and it was terrible. He was older though, and I think he just snapped and maybe doggy dementia.
Yes, and usually at that point, that's when you need to find like, and I worked for an aggression specialist for years, and I actually worked with several here during my day job. That will really try to root out the cause, because we know most aggression stems from fear, but then it can grow as more of a learned behavior, right? And when we're seeing it in older dogs, the first thing we want to do is vet check. Is there something going on pain wise? My shepherd the other day, she's older, so she can't walk. And when I lifted her up, she put her mouth on me, and it was very light, but I knew immediately there's something painful in her stomach, the way I'm holding her. And of course, neurologically, as they get older, there are a lot of changes happening there too. So we know that most of the time when they're showing aggression, it's going to be fear-based, right? But then it can grow. So we have to take a look. And that's when we definitely want to get an aggression specialist or even a vet behaviorist involved to kind of pinpoint, okay, this is a symptom of something else that's going on. And then we have to play detective and figure out what is happening. What are they uncomfortable about? Why are they why are they feeling the need to, warn you off? We used to see a whole lot of, in fact, I still will sometimes see people, because dogs don't live in a moral world, right? So they don't see things as good and bad. They see things as safe and dangerous. And so humans are so different, right? So if we go near them while they're eating, if we go near their food and they growl, we're immediately thinking, oh, no, bad dog. We want you to be nice. The dog is thinking, oh, I'm getting yelled at for growling. Okay, but I still feel uncomfortable. So, okay, I may not growl, but I'm going to pick another fear response, and, it's probably going to be something more severe, right? So that's when we really start to really root out, okay, what's happening? Where is the dog feeling uncomfortable? How can we change this scenario, right? And a lot of times, too, most of the time, we're going to have a vet involved just to make sure, because if there's something medical going on, we can't train out pain, right? We have to make sure that there's comfort there, and that there's nothing else that's going to make our job. We don't want to go uphill more. We want it to be a nice even line. So, so a lot of times it's just those dogs responding to something that they don't like, they're worried about, right? And So then they're responding in such a way to just kind of stop the incident from happening or stop the situation that they're in.
Um, I know that you're really into gamifying dog training. Can you walk us through what that looks like and how might that help an ADHD brain who is trying to train their dog stay engaged?
Yes, yes. Well, I think gamifying always makes things more fun for me, right? So, I've always been a big game person. So I like to work with people to decide what types of games do you like more? What's going to help you remember to train this dog? So some of it may be even as simple as, okay, you don't know what to train? Let's give you a deck of cards with different behaviors on it. Draw a card. Okay, go do that behavior, right? So just to make it more fun, or if somebody wants, if somebody wants to create a situation where they're more motivated by playing the game, like, okay, let's do a crossword puzzle. Okay, what is the first thing? Oh, you found sit? Okay, get up and ask your dog for a sit, right? Just to, because we get in ruts, right? We're like, okay, I'm going to work on, this happens to me too. Well, I've worked on sit the last week. What else do I have? And all of a sudden you can't think of anything else, even though there's a million things. But this way it forces you to kind of switch it around. But I also like to gamify it for the dog. So we talked about sniffing and how important that is. So at night, and I do this a lot with my lab because she is such a high energy dog, we'll go in the backyard. I'll have her kibble with me. She's very, very food motivated. And I'll call her to me. She'll say, come. And I'm like, yes, which is her marker, right? And I throw down food so she can sniff. So then she gets to play sniffy game. And as she's sniffing, I'll run to another part of the room or yard. And as she's done, as she's finishing up, I'll call her again. And then maybe this time I'll ask for a sit. And then, okay, yes, go get it. So she's sniffing. I get to run a little bit, and she gets a bigger reinforcement. And the sniffing actually will tire them out because sniffing for a dog actually builds production of serotonin. So when we can get our dog sniffing, it's a self-soothing exercise. So it's a great thing to do at the end of the night. Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yes.
And so when I'm going on a walk with my dog every day and he's annoying me, my male dog, because he's sniffing and peeing on everything, that is actually releasing anxiety for him and calming his nervous system.
Is yes, there's a lot of science on sniffing, right? It can change a dog's mood, it lowers their heart rate. So that's like, so whenever I have a dog that's nervous, the first thing I want to try to do is get their nose to the ground. I might even train them, like I'll attach a cue to it, like go sniff, and I'll train that so the dog starts to expect that. And it will just get them sniffing, and it will wear them out more. So I'm a big, like dog trainers talk about, I'm a big fan of sniffaries. So dog trainers will talk about sniffaries where you kind of let the dog lead the way and let them sniff. And that's pretty much all my walks. I always say my dogs have two rules on walks. One is they don't pull me. I want my shoulder intact when we're done. And the second is if I tell them their name, if I call their name, they come with me. So if I'm on a sniffari losing track of time, like, oh no, oh, I've got to get to work. I call their name and we get back. But other than that, I pretty much let them sniff whatever they want. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I feel guilty, but I also feel like I learned something. I remember years ago, a dog trainer told me, actually, I'm not sure she was a dog trainer, maybe an animal behaviorist. But she worked with like lions and tigers and like zoo animals. And I remember her telling me that when dogs go for a walk, this was about a walk. The importance of dogs going for a walk is when they're sniffing around, it's kind of like reading the morning newspaper and kind of, it's what's going on in the world, what's going on in their world. It's how they get information, which then it makes sense that that would also calm their nervous system because, okay, I know the lay of the land today.
Right, right. And they say that about 20 minutes of sniffing will equal about an hour of walks. I've not seen studies on that per se. I was just writing a blog about it this week though, so I was looking for a reference, and that's pretty much what most experts are saying. And I do believe that, right? Because even my senior shepherd, if I take her out and just she stays in one place and sniffs, she comes in and she's exhausted, and so even just those short walks around the park, if you just, and with her, it might take us 20 minutes to go a half mile, right? Which is really slow, but it's exhausting her because she's sniffing.
That is the best piece of information. I've never heard that. We live in the country, and so we'll let our dogs, it's fenced, and we'll let them just go out and run. And most of the time, they're just sitting in the sun. But a lot of the time, they're sniffing all around. I'm like, what are they doing? You've already gone to the bathroom, but now I know.
Yep, they're getting all that information. Who was there, right? And I will throw in things like I just ordered lamb's wool off Etsy from a farmer and let my dogs have some free time sniffing that. I have some actually just put on my social media a great video of all four of them sniffing that lamb's wool, and that is enrichment, right? That is something. If it's a rainy day, they got to sniff. It's a postcard from the world, right? They got to sniff something really cool.
Yeah, that is so great. I love that. Well, I could talk to you forever. Real quick, the clicker. If we want to learn more about how to do that kind of training, and we don't live near you, because if you live near Devene, you should run to her to take your dog there. Where can we learn this? Where would you recommend that we go?
Probably the best source is Karen Pryor Academy. She runs. So Karen Pryor is the godmother of clicker training. Yeah. And unfortunately, Karen herself has passed, but there's a wonderful trainers there that are carrying on her legacy. And she actually has a program. This is, if I were a 20-year-old trainer, this is the program I would go to, right? And I work, a lot of my colleagues have gone there. So she's got, if you go there, you can see all of the graduates of her program listed, and they're going to know that clicker backwards and forwards.
Okay. And would they be in my area?
Yes, they're, all over the country, actually all over the world at this point, but that is the best place.
Okay, I will find it. I will put that link in the show notes. Before I let you go, what is your number one ADHD workaround?
My number one ADHD workaround is to have lots of frozen bones in the freezer, because my number one rule as an ADHD, as a neurodivergent, is to have quiet time in the morning with my coffee to just reflect and get ready for the day. And dogs aren't always down with that. So I make sure I have those stuffed Kongs or beef cheeks. So just this morning, I could see my greyhound getting squirrely, and I said, nope. And so before they even start barking at me, I'm giving them their enrichment that will keep them busy for that half an hour, and I get to sit there blissfully with my coffee watching my morning news. So
I love it. I love it. Where do people know more about you and what it is that you do?
So my new blog and my new efforts for working with neurodivergent owners will be at distracteddog.owners.com. Right, so that's going to be my blog, and I do have some resources there that can help. I'm creating more training worksheets, right, so it can make it visual. And actually, you inspired me with the habit stacking, right? I'm coming out with some cards that people can print out and tape around for that. I thought that was a brilliant idea. And then my day job, I teach a lot of puppy and sports and basic training at Canine Turbo Training in Ferndale, Michigan.
Devene, thank you so much for spending time with us here today. I wasn't kidding when I said we've been going for way too long, and I still have so many questions.
Well, I appreciate it. Yes, I appreciate it, because I found you through a dog trainer. I told you my boss at the scent detection facility, she had a hard time because I couldn't prioritize. Like, I have a dog training for TSA, and I have a puppy that needs to go for a walk. Which is more important? I don't know, right? So she would get frustrated, and all of a sudden one day she comes and she's like, have you ever heard of this podcast called ADHD for Smartass Women? And I was like, no. She's like, I hear it. I'm listening to it religiously. And she is not neurodivergent. And she says, and I just keep thinking about you, and you need to start listening to it. So she started listening so she could help me. And that was phenomenal, right? What a great boss to have.
Well, tell her thank you very much. And yes, you are in the right environment around the right people, right? And then that means you can practice your brilliance. So thank you again for spending time with us here today. So that's what I have for you for this week. If you like this episode with Devene, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here next week.